They thought $600 was the price to bring me down. They didn't realize it would be the ticket that sent their entire empire crashing. One line of code, one forgotten license clause, and I turned that tiny mistake into a $9 million counterstrike. My name is Megan Lewis. I'm 38 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was the infrastructure architect at StratusLink, a mid-sized SaaS company that prided itself on disrupting enterprise communication. What they really disrupted was my career, my reputation, and ultimately, their own bottom line. The whole thing started with a billing discrepancy. $600, that's it, a rounding error in most enterprise budgets. But Connor Blake, our newly appointed CEO, saw it as an opportunity. Fresh from his third startup exit, Connor arrived at StratusLink with grand visions of streamlining operations and eliminating legacy inefficiencies. Translation: get rid of anyone who'd been around long enough to know where the bodies were buried. I'd been with StratusLink for 7 years, started as a junior developer, worked my way up through the ranks. By the time Connor arrived, I was the person everyone called when something broke at 3 a.m. I was the ghost in the machine, the one who left fingerprints in every critical system through scripts that kept the lights on. The $600 mistake wasn't even mine. It was a billing system glitch that miscalculated tax on a client invoice, the kind of thing that happened maybe once a year and took 5 minutes to fix. But Connor needed a scapegoat for his first all-hands meeting, and I was convenient. "We need accountability," he said, standing in front of the company with his perfectly pressed shirt and venture capitalist smile. "Even small mistakes compound into catastrophic failures. That's why we're implementing new oversight procedures." I sat in the back row, watching him use my error as a launching pad for his manifesto. The real developers, the ones who understood how our systems actually worked, exchanged knowing glances. We all knew what this meant. Connor was clearing house. Over the next 3 months, he brought in his own people, young hotshots with impressive GitHub profiles and startup pedigrees. They talked about microservices and Kubernetes like they'd invented them. They sneered at our monolithic architecture without understanding that our monolith processed 3 million transactions daily without breaking a sweat. I watched them struggle with basic deployments, watched them break production repeatedly, watched them blame the legacy code every time their clever solutions collapsed under real-world load. And through it all, my scripts kept running. The cron jobs I'd written years ago still executed faithfully every night, maintaining uptime, managing backups, balancing loads across our infrastructure. Connor's new architect, a 26-year-old named Tyler who'd never managed a system serving more than 1,000 users, presented his grand restructuring plan, beautiful slides, gorgeous diagrams, absolutely zero understanding of our actual architecture. I sat through meeting after meeting, biting my tongue as they outlined plans to tear down systems they didn't comprehend. The breaking point came during a code review session. Connor had instituted these as part of his radical transparency initiative. In practice, they were public humiliation rituals where his new team could showcase their superiority over the old guard. Tyler pulled up one of my repositories on the main screen, the room filled with Connor's hand-picked developers, all eager to prove their worth by tearing down the established order. "This is exactly the kind of technical debt we need to eliminate," Tyler said, highlighting a recursive function I'd written 3 years ago. "Overly complex, zero documentation, impossible to maintain." I let him go on for 5 minutes, dissecting my code like a medical student with their first cadaver. When he finally paused for breath, I spoke up from the back of the room. "That recursive function is why we haven't had a single case of double charging in 2 years, I said calmly. "It detects and prevents race conditions in our billing pipeline. The complexity you're mocking handles edge cases that occur maybe once in 10 million transactions, but when they do occur, they cost us customers." Tyler's face reddened. Connor stepped in smoothly. "That's exactly the kind of tribal knowledge we need to document and simplify. If only one person understands critical code, that's a business risk." "I submitted documentation for that module 18 months ago," I replied. "It's in the wiki, page 17 of the Billing System Architecture Guide." The room went quiet. Connor's jaw tightened. I'd made him look bad in front of his new team, and we both knew there would be consequences. They came faster than I expected. 2 days later, I was called into Connor's office. HR was already there. fake sympathy plastered across their faces. "We're restructuring the technology organization," Connor said without preamble. "Your role as infrastructure architect is being eliminated." Eliminated. I kept my voice steady, though my pulse hammered in my ears. "We're offering you a transition to technical support specialist. It's a lateral move." Lateral, right. From architect to help desk. From building systems to resetting passwords. The salary cut was almost 50%. "And if I refuse, then we'll have to part ways. No severance, of course, since we're offering you a comparable position." "Comparable?" I almost laughed. "I'll need time to think about it," I said. "You have until end of business today." I spent the rest of the day doing two things. First, I backed up everything I legally could: my code, my documentation, my commit history. Second, I reviewed every piece of open source software I'd ever contributed to the company's codebase. That's when I found it. 3 years ago, I'd written a load balancing library that became core to our infrastructure. Like a good developer, I'd open sourced it, hoping others might find it useful. The MIT license was standard, permissive, allowing both personal and commercial use. But I'd never officially transferred ownership to StratusLink. The library was still mine, and buried in the documentation was a clause I'd added after a previous employer had screwed me over. Commercial use requires explicit written permission from the copyright holder. StratusLink had never asked for that permission. I accepted the demotion that afternoon. Connor could barely hide his smirk as I signed the papers. He thought he'd won, thought he'd successfully sidelined a threat to his new order. I spent my first week in tech support, answering password reset requests and helping salespeople figure out how to share their screens. Humiliating work for someone who'd architected systems processing billions in transactions, but I smiled, stayed professional, and waited. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything. Every time the company deployed code, I captured logs. Every time they spun up a new service, I traced its dependencies. My load balancer was everywhere, woven into the fabric of their infrastructure like steel rebar in concrete. Billing used it. Authentication used it. The API gateway, the message queue, the backup system, all of them depended on my code. I met with Alex Chen that weekend. We'd worked together at my first startup before he'd moved into intellectual property law. Over coffee, I laid out what I'd found. "They're using your code commercially without permission." He leaned forward, interested. "Extensively. It's integrated into almost every critical system. And you have documentation proving you retained copyright." I showed him the Git history, the license file, the copyright notices. His smile grew wider with each piece of evidence. "Megan, this is textbook copyright infringement. With the scale of their usage," he did quick calculations, "we're talking millions in liability, potentially tens of millions if we can prove willful infringement." They knew it was my code. They watched me write it. "Even better, when do you want to move?" "Not yet. I want to document everything first. Every instance of usage, every deployment, every commit that depends on my library." Alex nodded approvingly. "Build your case. The stronger the evidence, the harder they'll fall." I returned to my tech support role Monday morning. While I reset passwords and walked users through basic troubleshooting, I built my case. I created a dashboard tracking every instance of my code in production. I captured logs showing how integral my library was to their operations. I documented every pull request, every deployment, every container image that included my intellectual property. The irony was delicious. While Connor preached about eliminating technical debt and legacy systems, his entire infrastructure ran on code I owned, code they were using illegally. Tyler and his team, meanwhile, were struggling. Their grand restructuring had hit reality like a sledgehammer hitting glass. Every attempt to replace my legacy systems resulted in outages, performance degradation, and furious customers. I watched from my tech support desk as they tried to reverse engineer my load balancer. They couldn't. The algorithm I developed handled edge cases they didn't even know existed. Their replacements crashed under real load, forcing them to roll back to my code every time. The breaking point came during their biggest deployment yet. Connor had promised the board a complete infrastructure overhaul by end of quarter. Tyler's team had worked 18-hour days building their clean, modern replacement for our core systems. Launch day arrived with fanfare. Connor sent a company-wide email about embracing the future and shedding the weight of the past. They switched over at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, peak traffic time. It lasted exactly 17 minutes. First, the authentication system failed. Users couldn't log in. Then the message queue backed up, creating a cascade of timeouts. The payment processor started throwing errors. Within minutes, every dashboard in the company was red. I sat at my desk, fielding frantic calls from customers while watching the chaos unfold in our ops channels. Tyler's team scrambled, throwing every trick they knew at the problem. Nothing worked. Their beautiful modern architecture crumbled under the weight of actual usage. At 2:17 p.m., they rolled back. My code resumed its quiet, efficient work, handling the load without complaint. The post-mortem was brutal. Customers were furious. The board demanded answers. Connor needed someone to blame, but he couldn't blame his hand-picked team without admitting his own failure. That night, I made my move. The cease and desist letter arrived on Connor's desk Thursday morning. Alex had crafted it perfectly formal, specific, and devastating. It detailed every instance of copyright infringement, every unauthorized use of my intellectual property. The demand was simple: stop using my code immediately or pay for a commercial license. The price $2.7 million for past usage, plus ongoing licensing fees. Connor called me into his office within an hour. His face was purple with rage. "What the hell is this?" He waved the letter at me. "It's a licensing notice for my intellectual property," I said calmly. "Your intellectual property. You wrote this while employed here. Check my employment contract. I retained rights to all open-source contributions. Section 7, paragraph 3. He fumbled for my file, scanning the contract. His face went from purple to white as he found the clause. "This is extortion." "No, it's intellectual property law. You've been using my code commercially without permission for 3 years. That's copyright infringement. I'm offering you a chance to make it right." "Will sue?" "Go ahead. I have documentation of every instance of usage, every deployment, every commit, every revenue dollar that flowed through systems running my code. How do you think the board will react when they learn you've been running the entire company on stolen software?" Connor's hands shook. "You planned this." "I protected my work. You decided to use it without permission. That's on you. Get out of my office." I stood, straightened my badge. "I'll need that licensing decision by end of week. After that, my lawyers will file suit." The next 3 days were chaos. Connor brought in external lawyers who confirmed what Alex had told me: StratusLink was completely exposed. They'd built their entire infrastructure on a foundation they didn't own. Removing my code would take months and cost millions in development and downtime. Fighting the lawsuit would be even more expensive, with no guarantee of success. But Connor, in his arrogance, decided to fight. He announced to the company that a disgruntled former employee was attempting to extort them with frivolous legal claims. He assured everyone that the matter would be resolved quickly. That's when I played my next card. Every open-source license includes a provision for public disclosure of violations. I published a blog post detailing the infringement, complete with redacted evidence showing how extensively StratusLink had built on my code without permission. I was careful to stick to facts, avoiding anything that could be construed as defamation. The developer community exploded. Copyright infringement is one of the cardinal sins in open source. Developers who'd previously admired StratusLink's technical blog posts turned on them viciously. The Hacker News thread hit the front page within hours. Reddit picked it up. Twitter threads dissected every aspect of the case. StratusLink's customers started asking uncomfortable questions. If the company had built its platform on stolen code, what did that mean for their data, their compliance obligations, their own liability? Within 48 hours, 3 major customers announced they were reassessing their relationships with StratusLink. The stock price, already shaky from Connor's aggressive restructuring, dropped 12%. Connor tried damage control. He posted a response claiming the issue was a misunderstanding and that they were working with all parties to resolve the matter amicably, but the damage was done. The developer community had turned against them. Customers were nervous. Investors were asking hard questions. That's when the board stepped in. I got the call on a Sunday evening. Richard Holstein, the board chairman, wanted to meet. No lawyers, just us. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Richard looked tired, older than his 60 years. "You've made your point," he said without preamble. "Have I?" "Because Connor still seems to think he can win this." "Connor is no longer making decisions about this matter." Richard's tone was carefully neutral. "The board is interested in a resolution. My terms haven't changed. 2.7 million for past usage, plus a commercial license going forward. That's substantial. Your legal team has explained the alternative. Federal copyright infringement carries statutory damages up to $150,000 per work infringed. I've documented over 300 instances of infringement. Would you like me to do the math?" Richard winced. "No, that won't be necessary." "There's also the matter of willful infringement. Connor knew it was my code. He chose to use it anyway after demoting me. That triples damages." "What would it take to avoid that claim?" I pretended to consider. Connor's resignation, public acknowledgement of the infringement, and my full asking price. "Megan?" "Those are my terms. You have 48 hours before I file suit." Richard left looking older than when he'd arrived. I knew I'd won. The announcement came Tuesday morning. Connor Blake was stepping down as CEO to pursue other opportunities. The board thanked him for his vision and leadership, while announcing a search for new leadership that would honor StratusLink's technical heritage while building for the future. The licensing agreement arrived that afternoon, $2.7 million for past usage, plus a $500,000 annual license for continued use of my code, payment within 30 days. But they'd underestimated the full cost of Connor's war on legacy systems. Without the institutional knowledge he'd driven out, StratusLink couldn't maintain its infrastructure. The new team he'd hired started leaving, unwilling to take responsibility for systems they didn't understand. Customer churn accelerated. The stock price continued its decline. 3 months later, StratusLink announced it was being acquired by a competitor for a fraction of its former value. The acquisition price was $47 million. A year earlier, they'd been valued at over $200 million. The $600 mistake had ultimately cost them over $150 million in value. I used my settlement to start my own consultancy. Within 6 months, I had more clients than I could handle. Turns out, companies value developers who understand both code and contracts. Several of Connor's legacy developers joined me, forming the core of a team that actually knew how to build and maintain scalable systems. The last I heard, Connor was struggling to raise money for his next startup. Word had gotten out about how he'd handled the StratusLink situation. Investors, it turns out, get nervous about executives who expose their companies to massive legal liability through ego and ignorance. Tyler reached out to me last month. He was looking for a job. Having discovered that his impressive GitHub profile didn't compensate for his inability to build systems that actually worked, I politely declined to help. Some bridges, once burned, don't deserve rebuilding. StratusLink still runs my code. They pay their licensing fee quarterly, always on time. The new CTO, someone who actually understands technology, reached out to thank me for building such robust systems. He admitted they'd tried again to replace my load balancer. Even with full documentation and the source code, they couldn't build anything that matched its performance. I told him I wasn't surprised. Good code isn't just about algorithms and syntax. It's about understanding the problem deeply, anticipating edge cases, building for reliability over elegance. It's about respecting the systems that work, even if they're not the newest or shiniest. It's about knowing that sometimes a $600 mistake isn't a mistake at all. Sometimes it's an opportunity. You just have to be patient enough to let your enemies create their own destruction. My name is Megan Lewis. I'm 38 years old, and I'm the CEO of Lewis Technical Consulting. We specialize in building and maintaining mission-critical infrastructure for companies that understand the value of institutional knowledge. Our clients pay us well, treat us with respect, and never, ever use our code without permission. Connor Blake thought he could erase me with a demotion. He thought $600 was the price of destroying my career. He was wrong. It was the price of his education. A $9 million education in why you don't go to war with the people who built your kingdom. Every night, Somewhere in the cloud, my code runs. It balances loads, prevents race conditions, keeps systems running that process millions in transactions. Each execution is a small victory, a reminder that good code outlasts bad management. Each licensing payment is vindication. They thought they were replacing me. Instead, they paid me to replace them. The consulting firm grew faster than I'd anticipated. Within the first year, we'd expanded from a solo operation to a team of 12, not through aggressive recruiting or flashy perks, but through something simpler: respect for expertise and fair treatment of developers. Most of my early hires were refugees from companies that had undergone similar transformations, talented engineers who'd been pushed aside by executives who confused disruption with destruction. They came to us hungry for an environment where technical excellence mattered more than political maneuvering. Sarah Martinez was one of the first. She'd spent 15 years building the core infrastructure at a financial services firm, only to be labeled resistant to change when she questioned a CTO's plan to migrate everything to microservices in 3 months. The migration failed spectacularly, costing millions in downtime. Sarah was scapegoated and shown the door. I hired her the day after she updated her LinkedIn status. Then came David Park, a database architect who'd been demoted for refusing to sign off on a data model that would have violated GDPR compliance. His manager wanted to ship fast and fix later. David knew later meant after we get fined. He chose integrity over a promotion. I chose him for our team. Each person brought not just technical skills but battle scars. War stories of good systems destroyed by ego, of solid code replaced with trendy frameworks that collapsed under load, of decades of optimization thrown away because someone read a Medium article about how Netflix does things. We built our company differently. No artificial hierarchies. No distinction between architects and mere developers. Everyone wrote code. Everyone reviewed code. Everyone owned the systems they built. We documented obsessively, not because some process demanded it, but because we'd all suffered from knowledge hoarding and tribal information. Our first major client came through reputation. Streamflow, a video processing startup, had hired one of Connor's protégés as their VP of engineering. Within 6 months, their infrastructure was in flames. Outages were daily. Their AWS bill had tripled, and they were hemorrhaging customers. The CEO, Janet Williams, called me directly. "I heard what you did at StratusLink," she said. "We need someone who actually knows how to build systems." We came in like firefighters to a 5-alarm blaze. Their microservices architecture was a masterclass in how not to build distributed systems. Circular dependencies, no circuit breakers, every service calling every other service in an intricate dance of timeouts and failures. "Who designed this?" I asked during our initial assessment. "Someone who gave a very impressive presentation about the future of cloud architecture," Janet replied dryly. We spent 3 months untangling the mess, not by throwing everything away and starting over, but by methodically identifying critical paths, establishing clear boundaries, and most importantly, understanding the actual problem the system was trying to solve. Turns out, Streamflow didn't need 40 microservices. They needed 3 well-designed services with clear responsibilities. The rest was complexity for complexity's sake, resume-driven development by people more interested in their next job than their current one. When we finished, their system was simpler, faster, and cost 60% less to run. Janet tried to hire my entire team. I politely declined, but agreed to a generous support contract. Streamflow became our flagship success story, the kind that had other CEOs calling. But success brought its own challenges. As our reputation grew, we started getting acquisition offers. Tech giants who'd realized that maybe, just maybe, experience and expertise were worth paying for. The numbers were tempting, life-changing money for everyone on the team. We voted on it, unanimous rejection. We'd all been through acquisitions before. Promises of autonomy that evaporated the moment the ink dried. Unique cultures steamrolled by corporate standardization. Good people reduced to employee numbers on a spreadsheet. Instead, we stayed independent and selective. We only took clients who respected our expertise. We walked away from contracts that demanded we compromise our standards. We built systems that lasted, relationships that endured. The industry started to shift. The era of move fast and break things was giving way to move thoughtfully and build things that don't break. Companies that had burned millions on failed transformations were ready to listen to people who'd been building reliable systems all along. I was invited to speak at conferences. The hidden cost of disruption. Why your senior engineers are your competitive advantage. Building systems that last in a world that doesn't. At one conference, I ran into Tyler. He was presenting on lessons learned from large-scale migrations. I sat in the back, curious. To his credit, he'd grown. His talk was humble, acknowledging the failures at StratusLink without naming names. He spoke about the importance of understanding existing systems before replacing them, of respecting institutional knowledge, of the danger of technical arrogance. Afterward, he found me in the hallway. "Ms. Lewis," he said, "I wanted to apologize." "For what specifically?" "For thinking I knew better, for not respecting what you'd built, for being part of something that hurt good people." I studied him. He seemed genuine. "Apology accepted. What are you doing now?" "Senior engineer at a healthcare startup. I spend most of my time maintaining legacy systems." He smiled ruefully. "Turns out they're legacy because they work." Hard lesson. Expensive one, for everyone involved. We talked for a few more minutes. He'd married, had a kid, gained perspective. The hotshot programmer who'd torn apart my code in that review session was gone, replaced by someone who understood that engineering was about more than clever algorithms. Before we parted, he asked, "Would you ever consider hiring someone with my background? Someone who learned from their mistakes, possibly. Someone who made those mistakes at my expense. That's a harder sell." He nodded. "Fair enough. Thank you for hearing me out." I watched him walk away, thinking about second chances and burned bridges. Some people learn, some people grow, but trust, once broken, takes more than apologies to rebuild. Back at the office, my team was deep in a new project. A government contractor needed help modernizing a benefits processing system that handled millions of claims annually. The previous vendor had promised a complete rebuild in 18 months, 2 years and $40 million later. They had nothing to show but PowerPoints and excuses. We took a different approach. Instead of replacing everything, we identified the pain points. Turned out the core system was solid, built by engineers who understood the domain deeply. It just needed optimization, better monitoring, and a modern API layer to integrate with newer services. 6 months later, the system was humming. Claims processed 50% faster, errors down by 90%, cost overruns eliminated. The government saved $30 million. We made $2 million. Everyone won except the consultancy that had been milking the contract. That consultancy tried to sue us for tortious interference. Their argument was that by succeeding where they'd failed, we damaged their reputation. The judge literally laughed during preliminary hearings. The case was dismissed with prejudice. Their CEO called me afterward, furious. "You don't know who you're messing with," he threatened. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," I replied. The same type of person who values perception over reality, who mistakes motion for progress. How's that working out for you? He hung up. 6 months later, his company filed for bankruptcy. Turns out you can only sell vaporware for so long before reality catches up. The success stories accumulated. Each client reference led to 2 more opportunities. We were selective, choosing projects where we could make a real difference. We turned down more work than we accepted, maintaining quality over quantity. But the part I treasured most wasn't the financial success or industry recognition. It was the emails from developers at our client companies. "Thank you for building something we can actually maintain. Thank you for documenting how things really work. Thank you for showing management that experience matters." One junior developer wrote, "Your code taught me more about software engineering than 4 years of college. The comments don't just say what the code does. They explain why it does it that way. I finally understand the difference between clever code and good code." That letter sits framed on my desk, a reminder of why we do what we do. 5 years after the StratusLink implosion, I received an unexpected call. Richard Holstein, the former board chairman, wanted to meet. Curiosity won out over caution. We met at the same coffee shop. He looked healthier, more relaxed. Retirement suited him. "I owe you an apology," he started. We should have listened when you raised concerns about Connor's plans. We were seduced by his vision, his energy. We forgot that sustainable businesses are built on solid foundations, not flashy presentations. Water under the bridge, I said, though I appreciated the acknowledgement. I'm on the board of another company now. We're looking for someone to audit our technical infrastructure, someone who will tell us the truth, not what we want to hear. Would you be interested? The audit revealed what I'd come to expect. Good bones weakened by years of quick fixes and resume-driven development. We provided a roadmap for improvement that prioritized stability and maintainability over radical transformation. Richard became a regular client and an advocate for sustainable technical practices. He'd learned his lesson about the cost of ignoring engineering expertise. Many executives never do. Connor Blake resurfaced eventually. A tech news site ran a profile on comeback entrepreneurs. He'd founded an AI startup, raised a small seed round, was promising to revolutionize something or other. The article mentioned StratusLink only briefly, describing it as a learning experience, where Connor had discovered the importance of balancing innovation with stability. No mention of the developers he'd driven out, the systems he'd broken, the value he'd destroyed. I felt a flicker of anger, then let it go. Connor would always be Connor, spinning failure into wisdom, treating people as expendable resources, but his reputation in the engineering community was permanently tarnished. The developers he needed to build his revolutionary AI would Google him, find the real story, and choose to work elsewhere. My team and I had moved beyond revenge to something better: success on our own terms. We'd built a company that valued what the industry so often discarded: experience, stability, the unglamorous work of keeping critical systems running. Every quarter, StratusLink's licensing payment arrived. The company had stabilized under new leadership, but never recovered its former valuation. The payment served as a reminder that code outlives corporate politics, that technical truth eventually prevails over executive fiction. But more than the money, more than the vindication, what mattered was the culture we'd built, a place where engineers were respected, where code quality mattered, where maintaining a 10-year-old system was as valued as building a new one. Young developers applied in droves, tired of ping-pong tables and false promises of changing the world. They wanted mentorship, stability, the chance to build things that mattered and lasted. We gave them that. Senior developers came too, refugees from the age wars that plagued tech, 50-year-olds with deep expertise, told they were dinosaurs by companies that would later pay millions to consultants who knew half as much. We welcomed them, valued their knowledge, paired them with younger developers in relationships that enriched both. The industry press called us contrarians and conservative. We called ourselves engineers. While others chased the latest trends, we built systems that would still be running when those trends were forgotten. One evening, debugging a particularly nasty race condition for a client, Sarah looked up from her screen. "You know what's funny? We're doing exactly what we've always done, building good systems, solving real problems. The only difference is now we get paid what we're worth." David laughed. "And we don't have to sit through meetings where someone explains why we need to rebuild everything in whatever framework they read about last week. Remember when that VP wanted us to migrate everything to blockchain?" Another developer chimed in. "For a payroll system." We laughed, but it was tinged with sadness. So much waste in our industry, so much value destroyed by people who confused disruption with progress. My phone buzzed. Another potential client, another system in crisis, another executive learning that maybe they should have listened to their senior engineers. I'd take the call, assess the situation, decide if we could help. But first, I finished debugging that race condition, because in the end, that's what real engineers do. We solve problems, we build systems, we create value that lasts. The code we write outlives the companies that commission it, the executives who oversee it, the trends that influence it. Long after the PowerPoints are forgotten and the vision statements have faded, the code runs on, silent, efficient, reliable. My name is Megan Lewis. I'm 43 years old now, CEO of a consultancy that helps companies build and maintain the systems that actually matter. We're not disrupting anything. We're doing something far more radical. We're building things that work. The $600 mistake that started this journey seems almost quaint now. Connor thought he was punishing me by highlighting that error. Instead, he gave me the push I needed to stop accepting less than I was worth. $9 million. That's what his hubris cost them directly. The indirect costs, measured in lost value, departed talent, and destroyed systems, were far higher. But from that destruction came something better. A company built on respect for expertise, a team that values experience, and the vindication that comes from proving that good engineering matters. Somewhere tonight, in data centers around the world, code I wrote is running, handling requests, balancing loads, preventing errors. Each execution is a small victory, each successful transaction a validation. They tried to replace me. They couldn't, because you can't replace understanding with arrogance, experience with enthusiasm, or solid engineering with slick presentations. You can try, but eventually, reality wins. Reality always wins.